dear brothers and sisters, let us go in to the breach on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Please make sure that you visit the Crusade channel. We want to emphasize to everybody to become a Founders Pass member. You're missing out if you're not a Founders Pass member, because you get access to other content, not just, let's say, Frontline with Joe and Joe or the King Dude Show, but you have new releases this week coming out, Mike Church Show. It's time for Catholic men of good will to prepare for separation from all big business with Eric Sammons, okay? Si Qua Virtus, Episode 6, Brett R. Smith. You have Daniel Savickas, The Hidden Dangers in the Infrastructure Bill, and a whole lot more content. So you need to become a Founders Pass member on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Make sure you get in the chat room at crusadechannel.com/chat. And please, as always, follow Joe and I on Facebook and YouTube. But more so now than ever, if you're hearing us, follow us on Rumble. We really want to make an effort to get away from YouTube and Facebook, and we love for you to follow us on Rumble. We love to build up a presence there. So please do that for us. In the meantime, we have, we think, a great conversation tonight. We want to talk about, Joe and I, some larger topics. Benedict XVI had come out not too long ago saying something about the German bishops that Joe and I want to talk about. And we want to tie that into a larger conversation about unity in the church. That to me is, and Joe, is one of the most important things we could talk about. We must be unified. That's what Christ prayed for, and that's what we have to be. Obviously, we're in a spiritual malaise. That's what we are. Father Eric Banneker, he wrote an article in First Things that Joe and I want to talk about, because I think he's watching the Frontline with Joe and Joe Ressinell, to be honest with you. Okay,
he should be.
He should be. All right. He should be listening to us on the Crusade channel, because what he's talking about is what we constantly hammer home on the show. We are in a spiritual malaise, and we're going to talk about that. I am so, Joe Ressinello, I'm so disappointed in Simone Biles. I really am. And the reason why I say that is I am one of those Catholics that I get happy, for lack of a better word. I get happy when I hear that a Catholic in the popular culture, okay, prays the rosary and or carries a rosary and prays to Saint Sebastian. I say, wow, that's great. Simone Biles and others who are Catholic. And then you find out, well, wait a minute. Really? You know, that she's such a disappointment, and we're going to talk about why. And we're not going to pick on her. But she really needs to be straightened out. You got a lot of parents that are holding schools accountable for politicizing education, and that's a really good thing. That's a movement, it seems, Joe Ressinello, in this country. We're going to talk about that. And if you want more evidence of that, Oregon, which, Joe, let's face it, we've said it on the show a million times. No disrespect to your brother who lives in Oregon. There's something in the water in Oregon, but not for anything. They're actually, fighting back. There's one school district in Oregon that's fighting back against a lot of this nonsense. We're gonna talk about that. Judges. We haven't talked about judges, Joe Ressinello, since the election and the need for them. Okay, but a federal court permanently enjoined the Biden administration's transgender mandate. To me, that's a story we have to talk about. Joe, did you realize that there's a lot of ex-gay people in this world? And it's something that we got to talk about. It's a great article by Doug Mainwaring, who is also ex-gay, okay, in LifeSite News. And it's a threat. It's a threat to the narrative that we hear out there when it comes to the LGBT agenda and all in a half. Ben Dominique, Joe. I'm telling you, dude's Italian. All right, there's no question in my mind. Ben Dominique is Italian. But Joy Pullman wrote an article in the Federalist. I thought it was fun for you and I to have a conversation, because I pulled out a few points. I think Ben Dominique is listening to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. I'm being honest with you, okay?
I love it.
And Ben Dominique says a lot of things that I think you and I are going to have a lot of fun talking about. And finally, we always talk about the need for saints. And that's not an exaggeration. We need saints. God will raise up saints. There is no question about it. God is in control of human history, and he raises up saints to move human history in the direction he wants. Well, Frassati was one of them. Pier Giorgio Frassati was one of them. And the more I read about him, the more I feel inspired by him. So hopefully we get to that conversation. We'll talk about Pier Giorgio Frassati. But in the meantime, let's go with the Germans, Joe. The Germans are causing problem like the Germans always do. So let's talk about Pope Benedict, the Germans, and unity in the church.
Well, as Joe said, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, it was critical vocally of the German church. The retired Pope said that many of the church's hospital, schools, and in the Catholic charity Caritas, this is in Germany, many of the people are involved in key positions who do not support the inner calling of the church and thus often obscure the mission of this institution, which is obviously the Catholic Church. That's who he's referring to. He went on to say a distinction must be made in the church between believers and non-believers. People should be brought out of the cover of their ministry. Now he's talking about, again, the Catholic Church in Germany. I think that's very interesting. I mean, let's be honest. There's a reason why before you receive communion that you say the creed. You're saying, I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe. If you don't believe in something that the church teaches, you should refrain from receiving communion and you should pray on it. Any good priest will tell you that.
Right.
That does not mean that you're not a baptized Catholic. It simply means I'm just going to make this up. You have a problem with saints. I don't believe in saints. I don't believe in them. If you're Catholic and you're going to mass, you should not receive communion because in the creed, we say we believe in saints. You believe, you believe, you believe, you believe.
The communion of saints.
Correct. I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
It's not for us to remake the church in our own image, whether you're going to Latin Mass or whether you go to Novus Ordo Mass. It's not your church. It's Christ's church. It's very important.
I think
important distinction.
I think it is a major distinction, and the church in Benedict, has been vocal about the church in Germany, because the thing is this, everybody can find a problem with the church, Joe. I mean, listen, the church has been around 2,000 years. Saint Jude wrote about the infiltrators that have come into the church. He wrote that epistle, what, 50 AD, 60 AD? Okay. We know that the infiltrators, the corruptors, the false teachers, they've all been there from the beginning. St. Jude never said, leave the church. St. Paul never said, leave the church. Okay. The church has to be one. What we are supposed to do is we're supposed to recognize error, correct it. I mean, look, God help him. We should all be praying for Cardinal Burke. Okay. Cardinal Burke has COVID. All right. Cardinal Burke and 3 other cardinals, they issued a dubia a few years ago to Pope Francis to clarify a few things, which he still has yet to do. Doesn't want to address it. They were being respectful. The Germans, okay, they just flat out don't listen. No, they just flat out say, well, we're not going to do it. Well, they, on the one hand, they say we're going to do what we want. And then when somebody like Pope Francis actually comes out and says, well, you know something, we're not going to bless same-sex unions. We're not going to do, we'll bless the individuals. What do the Germans do? Then they come out and say, well, we're not listening to that. I mean, this is not, regardless of where you are on that issue, which obviously the church is correct in saying that, okay? Regardless of that, you can't just turn around and say you're not going to listen. You can't do that. It is not in the, first of all, it's not. Go ahead, Joe. Go.
No, but you can't even say, to be honest with you, where you are on that issue. You're either on the side of the church or you're not. You see, this is what I mean. Like, to me, I've always said this on many shows. The church is painting by numbers. It's painting by numbers. This is the beauty of the Catholic Church. It's all written down. You either believe it or you don't. And you shouldn't. And that's why I liked his response. There must be a distinction between believers and unbelievers. It's not for you to remake it. It simply isn't. And that means if you're a bishop or you're the guy in the back of the church in Lodi, New Jersey, it's what the church says goes. And that's the way it is. And, I see it on both sides, Joe. I see it on both sides. I see it on Twitter. We were talking before the show. People don't acknowledge Francis as the Pope. Sorry, guy. You're not Catholic. He is the Pope.
See, that's one of those things that really bothers me. Like, sedevacantism bothers me. Okay. I'm not judging them as people, but you have to judge bad ideas. Sedevacantism is a bad idea. Okay. And it's a bad idea because who are you to say that Pope John the 23rd was not the Pope? Who are you to say that Pope Paul VI wasn't the Pope? You can have all sorts of problems with them. There have been problems with popes all throughout history. There was problem with Borgia, that he was a corrupt pope, and other popes. So you can always have a problem with a pope. Who are you to say that they're not Pope? Who are you to say that John Paul II is not the Pope? So I have a problem, with people that do that. Well, like I know when I have to listen to Francis, okay, and I know when I don't. When he's giving an opinion on something, I have to give it its proper respect. I have to listen to it, but I can reject his opinion on something. But when he speaks, okay, in other words, in this case, the talking about now, let's say on the traditional mass side, okay, when he speaks on this, okay, well, the bishops, I think, all came out with an appropriate response, which is, as it is right now, I, as the bishop, I'm paraphrasing Joe Resinello on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. But basically, what he said, what the like Cordileone and others have said is, for those who attend the Latin Mass, the Pope said, I have the authority to allow it, and I am going to continue to allow it until further notice where we get further clarification. Now, to me, that seems like something reasonable. Because again, you can't if and again, I go to Latin Mass. Okay, I go to FSSP. All right, but I'm not going to start punching back. In other words, at the Pope, I'm going to let the bishops try to wade through this and see what the best solution is. But this idea, both again, getting back to the Germans, okay, who don't want to listen, and sometimes, not all the time, I hate to use the words, Joe, left and right, but let's just call it the traditional crowd. And we are traditionalists. You and I are traditionalists. I don't, we don't not value tradition, okay? But the bottom line is we have to be careful of that also on our side. We have to be careful. Christ prayed the church be one. He prayed we all be one. Are people forgetting that, Joe? Tell me. I don't
Well, I
know.
think, again, I think it's human because people, want to do things their way. I mean, it's human nature, but it's also the way of Christ to bend your knee. I mean, I think of saints, Padre Pio. People thought he was a fraud. The church investigated him for 10 years. He couldn't say mass publicly. Why? Because people were going to see him almost, he was more important than the mass itself. And people, they wanted to investigate. He complied for 10
Right,
year.
right,
Jean Jagan, who I'm probably saying her name incorrectly, but she started the Little Sisters of the Poor. Founded that order. I believe it was a bishop or a priest. It was one of the two. Took it from her, and she just said, "Fine, I don't care." And on his deathbed, he renounced what he did.
right,
So my point is, there comes a point sometimes where you have to allow God to fight for you. I remember when Karapi was going through his situation, I was talking to a very holy nun, Sister Carmel. She was a missionary of charity. And I was telling her what was going on because they don't have TV, they don't have, newspapers. And she said, Joe, he should keep his mouth shut because God will fight for him. If you're
right,
on the right side of the fence, it may take time, but God may be teaching you something to be obedient. You know, like this is where I think sometimes we get lost in our own hubris. Obedience is a very big virtue in the church to be Catholic. Now, that doesn't mean you follow something that's clearly wrong. Like if someone said Mary wasn't assumed into heaven. Well, sorry, I'm not going down that road because
right.
I know she was, because it's a teaching of the church. But obedience, God works through all things, and it's a mystery. Don't discount, like, I'll be honest with you, I'll speak personally with Francis. His ambiguity I never cared for.
Right.
Whether it's weaponized or whether it's not, God will judge it. I'm not going there. But what I'm going to say is this, God made him the Pope for a reason. Like if he wasn't supposed to be the Pope, he wouldn't be the Pope.
Do
It's
we have
God's
do
church.
do we not have a lesson also from scripture in that? Because it's something that I think we should get through our heads. Remember what Christ said to Pilate? And Pilate said, he goes, "What's wrong with you? Don't you know I have the power to release you or have you crucified?" And Christ said to him, he said, as everybody at the Crusade Channel knows, Christ said, "You'd have no power over me if it wasn't given to you from above." We need to remember that. That doesn't apply to the Roman Empire, okay, or to other, let's say, nations and empires throughout history, or the church. They're there because God gave them that authority for God's purposes, as you said, and you won't know those purposes until you die. But I love your example. I love your example of Padre Pio. You want to know why? Because I think Padre Pio, and most people know that he was suppressed for 10 years, but he was obedient. Padre Pio has had more of an effect on bringing people to the church than you can imagine. And this was a guy who, for 10 years, like you said, couldn't even celebrate Mass. Okay. But nonetheless, I mean, I heard about Padre Pio from the time I was a kid. In other words, I knew who Padre Pio was. Padre Pio is an inspiration to us all. He should be. But one of the things that we ought to remember about him is what you said, Joe Resinello. He was obedient. Even if on the outside it looks like it was unjust, the treatment of him was unjust. Does it matter? He was obedient. And I dare say Padre Pio has had an amazing effect on
But you
Catholics
also,
worldwide and bringing others into the church.
oh, there's no question about that. But you mentioned like John Paul II. People have had issues with John Paul II. Again, he's a man. He's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. John Paul II was canonized in 6 years. 2 legitimate miracles. Legitimate. Look them up. A French nun had Parkinson's disease. I've seen interviews with her on YouTube. She was not even old. She was probably in her 40s, and she was cured. Another woman from Costa Rica, cured. God does not work miracles through people in 6 years who are heretics or sinners. Like, it doesn't work. No, let me rephrase that. He was a sinner, as I'm a sinner, and everyone, but heretics. You see, that's where sometimes I get lost in the rhetoric. Like, when people say these things, they'll say, he wasn't a pope. He's not a legitimate pope. Well, what about those 2 miracles? When's the last time you, Mr. Person, criticizing John Paul II, had a miracle work through you?
You know who had a great take I saw is and who's on our channel, Kennedy Hall. Okay. I saw him, I think it was with Tim Flanders, and I thought it was very well put on his part. John Paul II made a couple of did a couple of things that people have to say kind of like cringeworthy, okay, and rightfully so, okay, even in light of Catholic tradition and everything else. Kennedy Hall, I thought gave the best answer to a lot of the problems when it comes to Pope John Paul II. He said the Pope made some mistakes. He said, but he's the Pope. And at the end of the day, we as Catholics believe Pope John Paul II died in the sacraments. So any sins he may have committed or errors, okay, he died in the sacraments. He died in a state of grace. Now I'm paraphrasing Kennedy Hall, but that's the way I heard. I thought that was a perfect way to look at that, because the bottom line is this.
But Joe, did people actually say he's not in heaven?
No, there's some people out there. Now we're not talking about people who just, let's say, we're talking about some real, like, Diamond Brothers type people.
That's craziness, though.
It really is. They actually have a video that's on YouTube that calls Pope John Paul II the Antichrist.
Oh,
in other words, that's how. No. It's and they'll try to back it up. Robert Sungenis has debated, I think, Peter Diamond, and there's been debates with their brothers, and I think that they've been roundly trounced. But the unfortunate part is, you could get people to believe you when you make such a shocking statement. Pope John Paul II was the Antichrist. People tend to listen to that nonsense, and that's the problem. Like, these are the type of guys that would say the Novus Ordo is you're committing a mortal sin by attending the Novus Ordo. Like, I'm sorry, that's not just some, let's say, disagreement over the Novus Ordo and the traditional Latin Mass. To me, that's outright just I'm sorry, you're really not going to win any sort of real debate, not with any real Catholic, on a question like that. But what it does, Joe, it creates more than anything, and that's why we're talking about, Pope Benedict XVI in Germany and disunity. There's too much of this going on. Everybody's waiting for an excuse to pounce on somebody else in the church. And I don't know. There's a time for respectful debate. Maybe we need to have a big, full, blown out debate in the church about all these things. But at the end of the day, the one thing that you and I are going to emphasize to people, the one option you don't have, you don't leave the church.
Joe,
You
I'll be
don't.
honest with you. I think the documents speak for themselves. I think like a lot of these debates, people are making up issues that basically the documents, you either believe it or you don't. Like, honest to goodness. Like, and again, I'll refer back to John Paul II's miracles. God does not work miracles through heretics.
Joe, let's leave it there for a second. We got to take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll have the conversation. You're listening to the Crusade Channel, your home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and as we mentioned earlier, the Kennedy Profession. From sun up to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing. Stick around. We'll talk to you on the other side of the break. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello, way in the breach on the Crusade Channel. Always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Man, I'll tell you, if you're not a Founders Pass member at the Crusade Channel, you're missing out. A lot of great content. Kennedy Profession, King Dude, Rick Barrett, all of it. And a lot of new releases that come out every single week. So we would emphasize for you to become Founders Pass members. Look, we spend a lot of money out there on a lot of things, and obviously all of us waste a little money, for a couple bucks a month that it takes to become a Founders Pass member at the Crusade Channel. Absolutely worth it. If you want to feed your brain and feed your soul, you want to become a Founders Pass member of the Crusade Channel. So yeah, Joe, to me, this conversation about Benedict XVI, at the end of the day, it comes down more than anything else to unity. We have to be unified. And that doesn't mean we don't open our mouth. If I got a disagreement with Joe, you got kicked out of RCIA. So you know about opening your mouth. Okay. Not about not speaking out against error and things like that. But at the end of the day, I'm sorry. I feel sometimes, Joe, tell me what you think about this. Do you feel sometimes, because I don't know if I'm right about this or not, you feel sometimes people are committing Luther's mistake? In other words, they want to remake the church in their image, or they don't like something in the church. And then what happens is they end up leaving the church. That's a really, really bad mistake. You
Oh,
can't
it's
do
huge.
that.
But I actually think people are in the church that aren't in it because they don't believe what the church believes. I mean, like they're actually in the church, but they're not. Like you have to believe what the church teaches, like on the social issues, like contraception. If you say, I
Right.
don't believe that, well, guess what? You're not in communion with the Catholic Church. You could be going to church every single week. You're not in communion with the Catholic Church. Therefore, you're not receiving the graces that you could be if you were. Now, are we perfectly in communion with the church? Well, I'm not the Blessed Mother. I mean, she was perfectly in communion with her son. No one is. But at the same time, you have to believe what the church teaches. It's
Right.
not your church. It comes down to that. It really does. And I'll be honest with you, I've seen it on both sides of the fence. I'll use a perfect example. I don't go to charismatic masses. I have actually my one of the godfathers and godmothers of one of my children. They belong to that. What's that? Neo-catechumen movement. I've been to their masses. To be honest with you, I don't particularly care for it. I don't like, you know, it's in a Spanish community, and they're,
Mhm.
they play like, different types of music and they
Mhm.
clap. And I don't care for that. I'm just being honest, but it's valid. That sacrament is as valid as any other mass. Now,
Right.
it's not for me to say that that's not valid. I don't care for it. I don't go to it. But my point is, and that's what I'm talking about, the remaking of it. You're not the Pope. You're not the bishop. And as of right now, that's as legit as the Latin Mass in the eyes of the church, because both sacraments are as valid as the other sacrament that's being consecrated. So you accept it or you don't.
Right.
And if you don't accept that, to be honest with you, if you ask me, you have a problem with the Catholic Church. You should rectify that. You don't believe what the Catholic Church says because the Catholic Church blesses that Mass as of right now. And you're not the Pope.
Right.
And like I said, I don't go to it, but I acknowledge it as real. That sacrament is valid. Sorry.
Right. Yeah, Michael Jones Michael Jones made a good point. He said, if you're going to allow these things that are happening in the church to lead you into schism, then you are guilty of the sin of charity. I found that to be interesting because I haven't heard anybody say that. But that's one of the things, like you said, you have to do. Again, I always say the same thing, Joe. Our very first radio show that we did, way before we were on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. You remember what it was? It was about McCarrick. Okay. In other words, obviously a terrible, terrible circumstance. And Vigano had just come out with his letter, and we had done our first radio show. And the point I made then is the point I made now is like, why is everybody so shocked when there's problems in the church? Why does everybody think in their mind our problems go back to Vatican II? All right, and I've read the documents of Vatican II, and I know there's problems with Vatican II. I'm not naive. Okay, Robbie George was on our show. He said the problem with Vatican II is not necessarily the documents; it's those who hijack the spirit of Vatican II. Okay, he's got his head on straight. He knows what he's talking about. He's a lot smarter than us and most people. Okay, but why are people shocked when there's corruptors or infiltrators or the spread of errors and things like that within the church? And the reason why I brought up our first radio show, we brought up the first thing we mentioned was the letter of St. Jude. And then we mentioned, I think it was the first letter of St. Peter. In other words, where they're talking about the infiltrators and the corruptors that have come into the church, the false teachers. We could see them. We know who they are. Okay. You point it out. Okay. And you resist them and you fight against them. Okay. And hopefully they repent. And if not, you show them the door or you defeat their ideas. But you never, ever, ever get out of the bark of Peter. And you can't say, because Luther claimed that his new church was the church, Joe. But it was not the church.
Joe,
and Calvin did the same thing. Calvin did the same thing.
Look at all the times I read the Magnificat every day. There have been a number of times where we've had two popes. There's been an anti-pope. There's two popes, one in France, one in Rome.
Right.
Like no go. You know, it's no go. You can't have that. And like, again, that is one of the biggest scandals. You talk about unity. How it shows you how broken we are as men. We don't listen. I just was saying this to my wife. One of the primary messages of God the Father at the Transfiguration, what was it? This is my son. Listen to him.
Listen to him.
At the feast of the wedding of Cana, what did Mary say? Do what he tells you. Yet we don't want to. We don't want to. We have to come up with 700 different ideas. Everybody, 700 different ideas. Our ideas, this idea, that idea. You know something? You know, to be honest with you, we lose the trees in the forest sometimes. You know, people like, oh, please. I could, like, they just get Joe, I'll be honest with you. There's things sometimes I just shake my head. People cut off their nose to spite their face.
Right.
Like
I think people, Joe, I think what happens is people mistake, like somebody commented earlier that the mistake is that to argue with someone, and I say to use the word argument in a very a positive way, to argue a point, to make a point to someone is not the same as division. If I disagree with somebody in RCIA and I respectfully tell them, you know, you ought not have said that, that doesn't mean I, want to kick them out or they want to kick me out. Not like you got kicked out of RCIA. All right. And a lot of times people do sow division, confusion, all of that. In other words, this is why we say all the time at the front line with Joe and Joe this is why if you're not receiving the sacraments and you have the grace and the gifts of the Holy Spirit at all times, you could be deceived by this stuff. In other words, just to argue with somebody is not division. In other words, just to have a conversation with somebody in a point of disagreement is not division. But what we're seeing now, and getting back to the Germans, is they have no problem setting themselves up as a German church. And there's no German church. Quite frankly, there's no American church. De
Agreed.
facto, there is. De facto, there is, but de jure, there is not. Okay, you cannot you are not by law. Okay, by church law, you are not the Church of Germany. You're the church in Germany, like we have the church in America. But you're not the Church of America. You don't practice something different than, let's say, what comes out of Rome. Yet we see it all over the place. We see it all
Well,
over the place. And it's a very, very trying time because, again, Francis has not helped because he is a confusing pope. No way around that. That's about as respectable as I could say it. He is a very confusing and ambiguous pope. Okay. And he said that himself. So it's not like I'm putting those words in his mouth. He said he wants ambiguity. I don't know why. Okay. But we have to clearly see by constant, frequent reception of the sacraments, we need to keep our eyes opened so that we could confront these battles within the church, but without sowing disunity. And I do think that there are those who want to do that. We need to safeguard that we're not tempted to do that.
I would agree. I think the underlying problem with the German church is it's very wealthy. Um, from what I hear, they take out, I believe, 10% of people's salary, and you have to allot it to your, house of worship, whether you're a Methodist, a Lutheran, a Catholic. The church in Germany is very wealthy. Why do I bring that up? Wealth corrupts people. If you look at um like the church as in the universal church, you go to poorer countries, the people are by far more pious than they are. Now, you will find pious people in rich countries. That's a fact. But I could remember this very distinctly. When I was in Haiti, I'll never forget this as long as I live. Uh, After the earthquake in 2010, the roof of a church came off, and I went down with some Franciscans to build it. Anyway, dude, they went without, the church had no roof. On Sunday, it was packed.
Right.
It's hot. And also on Saturday, all the shoes, all beat up shoes were outside the doors of people, and people were coming to shine them, to go to church, to put on their best. Dude, we don't do that as
No.
Americans. And these are people, dude, they didn't have a roof on the building.
Right.
So that's because there's a need. When you have nothing, I mean, nothing, you have God. That's it. You cling to God. We don't have that. That's why the nativity, when you pray the rosary, the joyful mystery, one
Joyful
of the
mysteries. Yeah.
virtues is poverty. People say, what's that? That's a virtue? Yes. The Blessed Mother and Joseph were poor, and through poverty, they focused. Well, Mary probably didn't have to focus as much as Joseph did, but he did
Right.
too. He had to focus on
Right.
God,
Right.
because money distracts you. It does if it's not used properly. If you're using it properly, it's different. Money is
Yeah.
not a
It's like,
sin. It's how you use it.
it's and exactly right because I always was struck by the. I mean, for years, even when I was in high school, and I was just not really thinking about the faith, but some things a little bit thinking about it. But I always remember being struck by that. We remember Joe, and we were back in high school and Catholic school, and they really do teach you that you're going to be an achiever. You're going to go out and you're going to get a really good job, and you're going to go to college, and you're going to make a lot of money and all that. I remember asking one time. I think the setting was like a retreat weekend that my high school had sponsored. I remember asking about Jesus saying, it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to go to heaven. I went, and in my mind, I always thought that, wow, that's pretty harsh. That means if you have some money, you're screwed. And I remember saying in my mind, asked somebody on the weekend, I said, well, we're all here because our parents send us to a good Catholic school so we can come out and be successful and make money. And I remember at the time, a really good layman was there, and he said, he goes, exactly what you said, and we have to remember the reason why Jesus said it's hard is because there's so much of a temptation with money to make money and things and worldly things. Remember Benedict in his article about the Germans talked about worldliness. Okay, it's so tempting when you got a fat bank book You know what I mean? You don't think in your mind about your roof blowing off because, quite frankly, you have a secure roof. You don't think in your mind about your car breaking down because, quite frankly, you probably have a better car. The distractions, as you pointed out, Joe Rossinello, on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online, they're abundant. They're abundant when you have money. And unless you really focus on the sacraments and the need for grace, you could get. I'm not bashing rich people. There's plenty of very, very, very virtuous rich people, and as well as poor people. I'm not bashing them, but wealth is such a temptation that you need the frequent reception of the sacraments
I would
to to
agree,
to, to keep yourself straight.
but also, to be honest with you, think about it this way. If you can help somebody, see, I agree with that, what you said, but if you have money, you have the ability to help somebody. And if you refuse, that's a sin. You see, that's the sin of the rich man. Like,
Right.
if I've thought about this because I've been to Haiti and I've also been for work to Miami. And Miami's a very wealthy city. I've worked in Miami. I've eaten at restaurants in Miami, very expensive. And I could remember going to Miami after I've been to Haiti, spending ridiculous money, not my money, corporate money, and saying to myself, in Haiti, people are eating dirt. And here I'm spending $17 on a gin and tonic. That was 20 years ago.
Right.
You see, that's the sin. You see, if you have money, you have to provide for your family. Have to. You have to educate them. That costs a lot of money. You have to make sure they're safe. There's a roof over their head. But do you share? You see, because you're a person of means. You see, God sees everybody as brothers and sisters. And I've used this example with you before. If I had 12 kids and 11 of the 12 went to Harvard and were surgeons and they were worth millions of dollars, and I had one kid that was a special needs kid, I would say on my deathbed, you take care of your brother because he can't take care of himself. He has special needs. You see, because I have money. And if I refuse to take care of somebody because I have the money, if you don't have the money, that's a different, you can't do what you can't do. But if you have money, you see, that's the sin. And I think, I'll be honest with you, like, also it's detachment from money. That's why tithing is important. When you tithe, I'll be honest with you. When you tithe and you write a check, it hurts.
Right.
It'll hurt. But
Right.
because you're human. But what it does, it detaches you from money.
Right.
Like when you get like a bonus and say you're like, I'm going to give away, I'm going to throw a number. I'll give away $2,000.
Right.
You write that check, you're like, ooh, that hurt. As a
Right.
human. But what it does, it detaches you from money. And that's
Absolutely.
again what Americans don't do. They
Yeah,
don't
well,
do it.
here's another thing too that we have to remember getting back to the Germans, okay? They, as you said, they get money from the state. That means that because they're not relying on the generosity of the faithful who do tithe, some give 5%, some give 10%, some give $1. The widow gives her mite, okay? But when you're getting money from the state, because if you're just saying what the people want to hear, you'll get people in Germany saying, "Well, the Catholic Church is saying that I could be in a sodomitic relationship, so I'll just belong to the Catholic Church and they can take 10% of my money." That's why, in my opinion, okay, in as much as I know about what's going on in Germany, is they get their money from the state. So basically, it just comes down to a numbers game then. But getting back to what you said earlier, but then are you feeding the poor? Are the German prelates feeding the poor? And I don't mean the poor who are hungry with food. I mean the poor who are spiritually hungry, who are not being told the fullness of the truth, especially in Germany. They don't want to listen on contraception. They don't want to listen on gay marriage. They don't want to listen to any of it. And a lot of it strikes me they're doing that because they want to keep the pews full, because they want to keep the pews full, because they want to keep the money going. And
Well, that's
unfortunately,
very
it's the same.
possible.
It's the same thing in America right now. A lot of American bishops and cardinals don't want to say a damn word about the regime now in Washington because they have money that flows to them from the federal government, and they don't want to or they have a tax exempt status that they don't want to jeopardize. But that is a lack of charity. That's a lack of charity because the people need the gospel. And we're going to talk about our spiritual malaise in a few minutes at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Okay. That's one of our problems. We're not feeding people the gospel truth. Why, Joe? For money, both in Germany and America. We're not doing it. Okay. Like I said, we're worried about you got Sean O'Malley goes down to the border with that showy mass that they said to give the Eucharist through the bars because Donald Trump was president. Would he do that now? Are you seeing all those prelates in America now at the border where it's a disaster right now under this regime? That goes to show, you see, that's why we have our eyes open, because you could look at a Sean O'Malley or Cardinal Tobin here in New Jersey, in Newark, and say, well, why aren't you at the border now holding mass? Because now it's a disaster. Okay. And it leads you to believe that a lot of it and a lot of what's going on in Germany just comes down to plain old money.
Well, think about
And it's a lack of charity, Joe. It's a sin against, if you're not preaching the gospel and you're a prelate in particular, it is a sin against charity.
Oh, that's a given. But also people don't trust that God will provide. They worry about, like you said, the state. I need to pay my bills. They'll rationalize things. I mean, we all do that to a degree in life. But think about the gospel of Christ. The rich man, he did everything right. He did everything right. And he said, you lack one thing. Give your money to the poor. He walked away sad. He was attached to the world. You see, you can't be attached to the world and be attached to God. We're in the world, though. You can't run away from the world. You got to be in the world. Christ lived amongst his enemies, but you can't be attached to the world.
I think that was one of Benedict's points in that article, was that he used the word worldliness referring to the German bishops. He backtracked on it a little bit, but the point was still made. Why are you trying to be in bed with the world? You're the Catholic Church. Why are you trying to be in bed with the culture, which is corrupt to the core? The culture in Germany is no different than the culture in America.
Oh, it's the same.
Whether it comes to the rainbow agenda, abortion, all of it. Okay. No different than America. Why are you attaching yourself to the world? You're not being pastoral. You're not. Oh, somebody would tell Cardinal Marx that and the rest of them. You're not being pastoral. Okay. You're not helping souls. All you're really doing is just telling people what they want to hear. And you can only come to one conclusion. Well, they're doing it because, as you said earlier, the system they have in Germany, as long as they have more people that identify as Catholic, they'll get that money. The person will have that money taken out of their paycheck, and then it'll be redirected to the church. It's a bad move. I think that, like you said, 100%. I think the church needs to go. The church needs to go back to simply the tithing of individual Catholics, both rich and poor, from the widow's mite to the rich man's $10 million check and everywhere in between. The church needs to go back to that and tell as we always say at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, tell the state, screw you, creepo. In other words, get out of our business. We're the Catholic Church, and you're not going to mess with us, and you're not going to hold money over our head. I think that would be a very good step, both in Germany and America.
I would agree.
Worldliness is a bad thing, Joe. Well, and again, we all go through it individually. We fall into the world. We all become the prodigal son or the prodigal daughter at some point, or whatever the case might be. You realize being attached to the world really does just suck.
Well, it sneaks up on you because you get comfortable. You see, that's the problem. To live in poverty, and I have seen orders that live pretty close to poverty. No one does it perfectly, but you get comfortable. You know, like we talked to Albino, like they live on Providence. He said very simply, if we don't have sugar, we don't drink coffee with sugar. If we get potatoes, we eat potatoes. That's all we have. So we eat it. Right. You see, you're not comfortable. You know, I mean, think back to the Old Testament with the Israelites when they were in the desert. They complain. You get comfortable, you know, and that's the problem. I mean, the church has become, it's wealthy. The Catholic Church in America is prestigious. Look at the schools: Boston College, Holy Cross, Georgetown, Notre Dame. My friend at work, his son just graduated Boston College. He told me $78,000 a year.
Ridiculous.
Dude,
ridiculous.
That's absurd. I mean,
and they're not getting a Catholic education. They're getting a worldly education, but they're not getting a Catholic education, and that's for damn sure. Joe, we got to take a break. So you remember, we're going to come back right after the break because we need to talk about our spiritual malaise. And Father Eric Banneker wrote a great article about that in First Things. Joe and I want to talk about that. You're listening to the Crusade Channel, your home for the Mike Church Show. Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Profession. From sunup to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing. Stick around. We'll talk to you on the other side of the break. Welcome back, everyone, to the Frontline with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. And we are way in the breach on the Crusade Channel. Always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Remember, the Crusade Channel chat room, the only social media out there worth actually socializing in, is always open, and that is at crusadechannel.com/chat. We emphasize, Joe and I, that we are supporters of the Crusade Channel. We receive no compensation whatsoever for being here. We love doing it. King Dude loves having us, and we love being on here. And so we would emphasize to all of you that to become a Founders Pass member means that you're going to have access to all of the station's content. And it is incredible content. You have the Mike Church Show, #1, first and foremost, some new releases coming up this week. It's time for Catholic men of goodwill to prepare for separation from all big business with Eric Sammons. All right. That's a very big conversation for all of us to have. King Dude's going to have, a lot to say about that with Eric Sammons. So you're going to want to see that. Si Qua Virtus, episode 6, Brett R. Smith, part 1. You're going to hear Brett R. Smith and Daniel Savickas, the hidden dangers of the infrastructure bill. You always know with these big bills, Joe, there's things in there you really just don't want. However, Daniel Savickas is going to break it down, but you get all this from being a Founders Pass member. So we would emphasize to all of you to do so. Now, having said that, we need unity in the church, Joe. That's first and foremost. And we need to get away, as Benedict said about the Germans, we need to get away from worldliness. It is a danger. It's a temptation. It's a danger, and it's a trap. Now, let's, Joe, move on, because I thought that this was a great article written by Father Eric Banneker. All right, everybody's talking about our malaise, and we do have a malaise, okay? Not the Jimmy Carter kind of malaise, okay? This is a real malaise, a spiritual malaise. Joe, let's talk about that.
So Father Eric, this is what he had to say to start off. We'll just pick up a couple of excerpts from the article. He says, our country is spiritually sick. I've seen political polarization and pathetic feuds continue to isolate us and affect our national mood. We are no longer formed in basic virtues. I was talking an afternoon. This is an incredible statement. I to be honest with you, it doesn't shock me. I want to share it.
Right.
But it's an incredible take. He says, I was taking an afternoon walk through a neighborhood. I overheard two people conversing. One said gleefully, Lindsey Graham has the virus. The other looked around to see if anyone was watching, then pumped her fist in the air. This is not the type of interaction characteristic of a healthy society, Father Eric says. They are the result of the failure of human ecology. He's so right. I mean, listen, dude, to want someone to die is absurd. I mean, dude, I'll be honest with you. You could disagree with someone. You could not like them, but to want them to die.
Joe, let me because there's more meat on these bones in this conversation, that this article that Father Banneker wrote. But let's stop there 1 second. Let's talk about this, okay? What I'm tired of hearing of is, well, both sides do it. No, they don't. No, they don't. Okay. In other words, because when I hear, if somebody said I want Barack Obama to die, I would say that is a disgusting thing to say. If you said that about Biden and Pelosi and all the people we criticize here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, particularly their bad ideas, I would be the first one to say that is a sin. That's a sin. It's and as Father said, it also is very characteristic of a very unhealthy society. Okay, but both sides don't do it, Joe. Remember something I brought up on the show on the Crusade Channel at the Frontline with Joe and Joe all the time about Joy Reid. That woman justified Steve Scalise getting shot because of his position on abortion and gay marriage. Okay, that's the view. That's what Father Banneker's talking about here. Okay, is that how about when Rush Limbaugh died? God rest his soul.
Oh, okay. There was some horrible tweets. Horrible.
All right. Now I know there's people out there on the right that would do the same thing. I'm sorry, not as prominently not as prominently as the left, particularly in the fact in the organs that the left controls, like Hollywood and the media and academia, where they feel like they have carte blanche, that they could say whatever they want. If somebody wishes Barack Obama to be dead, if they make it known to me, I'm going to correct them. If they have that in their heart, I'm going to, all I can say to them is, if I knew is, well, you need to pray that you change your heart. You can't do that. You cannot do that. That's a lack of charity. Okay. But my point is, not both sides do it. And that's part of what's going on right now. That's part of what's going on is this woman actually was happy that Lindsey Graham might die from COVID. It's disgusting. Go ahead, Joe.
It is. It is. Father goes on. He said, the words of our Lord, and he's talking about division here in terms of how, the truth will divide. He said, the words of our Lord take on fresh urgency. I have come to cast fire upon the earth. Jesus was well aware of the explosive power of the gospel. He also knew that it could and would divide people, spouses, families, groups of friends. That division was based on a critical question. Who do you say that I am? Jesus would not allow people to be indecisive. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. He instructed his disciples in that manner. The revelation of St. John conveys the same message even more vividly. Be hot or be cold, or I will spit you out of your mouth, my mouth. I mean, it's so true. I mean, people like to say, like, people like to live in the gray. It's comfortable in the gray. Go along to get along. And frankly, I mean, Christ had enemies. And frankly, if you're going to say the truth, you're going to have enemies. People are not going to like you. It's just the way it is. And we talked about this. We interviewed Eric Sammons recently on our Veritas Catholic Network show. And we all three of us, myself, Joe, and Eric, we were talking about how people yearn for human respect. It's natural.
Right.
It's natural. People, even when you're a kid, you want to belong to the crowd. Everyone wants to belong. And sadly, people do a lot of things bad to belong. I mean, from being a kid to being an adult, whether it's in your neighborhood, whether it's, your kids who are playing sports and you want them to be, in the in crowd, people at work. It continues the entire lifespan of human beings to be respected. You see, Christ had a choice. The devil tempted him in the desert. He said, I'll give you the whole world. He said, I don't want it. Like Christ, like I think of many times the people that I respect most in life are people that are very gifted, who chose a path different. Like, if you're not so gifted, it's still a hard choice to follow Christ. Let's be honest. It's hard for anybody. But then there are people that are really gifted, like super smart, good looking, athletic. And I've known people like this. I always mention Rich Williams, who I grew up with in my town. He was an all-American soccer player.
Mm-hmm.
He taught English as a second language in Patterson, never owned a house until he retired. He went to University of Pennsylvania. He should have been rich.
Right.
He chose a different road. People like that, I find to be incredible because they had everything and they put it down.
Right.
If you don't have it, it's still hard to follow Jesus. But if you have it and you put it down, like Father Lewis was rich.
Right.
He's the guy who helped us, for those who don't know, to start our show. He was rich. He was, he bench pressed 385 pounds, just so you know. Strong, rich, and smart.
And good looking.
He owned car dealerships. Gave it away and became a Franciscan priest.
Right.
Dude, that's hard.
Oh yeah.
Dude.
That's that radical trust. That's that right. But here's the thing, Father Banneker, he points out, in other words, he said the antidote to our spiritual malaise is to embrace the gospel in all its fullness. And that's very important because a lot of times, Joe, what a lot of people like to do is they love to pick and choose. Take the German bishops that we mentioned earlier. I'm sure they say a lot about the poor, as Christ said a lot about the poor. So they'd be right about their message about the poor and about the need to give to the poor. They're wrong about everything else. Okay. It's the gospel, but it's not the fullness of the gospel. You see, they say enough about the gospel that's going to be palatable to the world, Okay. But they don't say those things that are gonna have the result that Christ is talking about, where he says, "I've come to cast fire upon the earth." I always thought that was incredible. What do you mean? Jesus says, "I didn't come to bring peace." What? And I remember thinking in my mind, well, what does that mean? And then after listening to some good homilies and some good lectures, I realized what he meant. In other words, the gospel is divisive because it forces you to choose. You have to choose. Okay. And then you have to choose what the right thing is to do, which is to follow Christ and his church, or you have to do, or you're going to follow the wrong thing. And what does he say? You mentioned it about Revelation. Be hot or cold, but don't be in the middle because I'll spit you out of my mouth. No, it's the problem, and this is what Father's pointing out. It's the gospel, yes, but in all its full. There's a lot of people, Joe, talk about the poor. Bernie Sanders talks about the poor, okay, whether or not he means it. Okay, he's a communist. But the thing is, but does it mean he embraces gospel values? You have to embrace it all. And that's one of the problems we have. And that's what Father's pointing out. Until we are willing, as you pointed out, until we're willing to, let's say, have people make us their enemy. We're not making people our enemies. Okay. They make us their enemies. Okay. We love our enemies. Okay. We pray for them. But that's what happens when you don't go with the world. And if you don't embrace the gospel in its fullness, you want to know what? None of our problems are going to go away. And they are plentiful, but none of our problems are going to go away. You have to be able to speak the truth, and you can't be afraid to say it. We do it here at the front line with Joe and Joe. We do it imperfectly, but we try. We try to tell people if they're listening to us, share our videos, listen to the Crusade channel, subscribe to the Crusade channel, support others, okay, that are out there that are doing the same thing King Dude's doing, the same thing we're doing, okay, to spread the gospel truth in its fullness out there. Don't be afraid to make enemies. And that's the remedy that Father Banneker is pointing out. That's what we need to awaken from our spiritual malaise. And Joe, let's face it, it is a pretty dark spiritual place that our country's in right now.
Well, the Holy Spirit, one of the fruits of the Holy Spirit is courage. But also, like I said, is detachment. That's not one of the seven fruits, but that's to be detached from the world. Um, to speak the truth, you have to be willing to be like persecuted. I mean, it's part of the deal. Even people who love you, like it could be someone in your family, it could be a lifelong friend. Like this is hard. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
Christ was very clear with his disciples, particularly on the Eucharist. Will you leave too? We talked about that too with Eric Sammons. He was very clear. He wasn't selling anything.
Right.
Um, and the truth is like a sword. I mean, in many respects, and it's hard. Let's be honest. We're here human. It's hard to do. Again, we have a natural tendency. We want to belong. We want people to like us. You know, it's hard to be the odd man out. And you will be the
Oh
odd
yeah.
man out. There's no question. I've experienced that in my own life. When you
Some
make
people are some people are more respectful to you than others when it comes to that. Some people have a complete lack of charity and respect when you're the odd man out. Some people still show you respect, but both groups will still look at you like you're a weirdo.
Oh,
Like
no
if you
question.
embrace
That's
the
a fact.
gospel, like you're like he's one of those Catholics. What? One of those who actually believes in the religion and what the church teaches? Always, like I don't agree with Islam, but should I respect somebody who says, well, I'm a Muslim, but I don't really believe in it, or I don't believe in everything? Well, then call yourself whatever you want, but then you're not really a Muslim. I mean, to be something means something, okay? Affects how you live your life. And to be a Catholic means that you believe in everything the church teaches. It's really that simple. And like you said, Joe, one remedy I would offer, just to digress for a little bit, is to pray for more Catholic friends and to be in a more Catholic environment. I know that's very difficult in our modern society. You work in a bank, for heaven's sake. Okay. I work in hospitality in New York City. Not exactly friendly environments for guys like us. Let's be clear about that. There's no way around it. We have to actually watch our mouths in the workplace. We could get canned. We can get canned for
No, I
opening our
know
mouth.
that, but I also think that God, I think about myself, and I've met all types of people in the 23 years that I've worked in banking. Um, Dude, you do leave, like, I think God called me there. To be honest with you, like, even if you're not preaching the gospel as in reading the Bible, it's your example. It's how you act, like how you carry yourself in business. Like, I can remember when I used to travel a lot, I never would cheat on my expense accounts ever. And I traveled with people who used to cut corners. And
Right.
I can remember one time he was my boss. We got into, like, dude, he treated me horribly, yelling at me because I wouldn't fudge the T&E.
Right. Right. Right.
God put me there. You see, like that's where what I'm talking about. Like, our life, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he said that. Like, Christ lived amongst his enemies. Like, we're there for a reason. We're not here to be necessarily comfortable. Like, this is, we're traveling through the valley. God put me in the bank. And frankly, I must be there because that's
Right.
where, if you ask me, to show people the gospel, maybe not with me saying, standing on my desk, reading the Gospel of John. I go to mass every day
Right.
at noon.
Right.
Everyone knows I do. I get
Well,
up.
that
Where
was
you
going to be my
going?
point. Everybody knows who you are. No, that's the idea. Everybody knows who Joe Rossinello is, and how you live your life. And you'll never know, you not in this world, not in this life. You'll never know till you're in heaven, exactly what kind of an effect that had. It's like we said earlier. That was just like we said earlier about, let's say Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea because God gave him that authority. It's like any bad pope in church history. Well, God put them there for a reason. Okay, so it's the same thing. God put you in that bank for a reason, and you've planted seeds that you'll never know in this life, and you will find out in the next. And me, the same thing in the restaurant. In other words, I've plenty of people I've spoken to about the faith in a very charitable, nice way, very conversational, truthful, of course. Okay, not lying about the faith. You don't ever know what those seeds are, but that's how you spread the gospel. So when you work in an environment, again, we're using New York City, which is basically Sodom and Gomorrah, all right, part two on steroids. Okay. You think in your mind people don't want to hear what you have to say. You'll be surprised how many people do. You'd be surprised how many people come up to you and say, "Can I ask you a question about this, that, or the other thing? Maybe about abortion, maybe about gay marriage." I've been asked questions about both of those things, two hot button issues that you could end up in a lot of trouble in New York City if you talk about them in the workplace. But God meant for me to have those conversations. He meant for us to be there. And that's I think what part of what Father is saying is that we can help to awaken other people as we are being awoken ourselves by people who know more than us by listening. We listen, you and I, we listen to what people who are smarter than us have to say and have more insight. And then we can actually talk to other people in the same way and hopefully they listen. But you have to embrace the gospel in its fullness. You can't say, as a Catholic, if somebody says, "Do you believe that?" and say, "Well, this, that, well, Vatican II, blah blah." No, I believe that. I believe that. Yes, Jesus Christ rose from the dead on the third day. Absolutely. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be a Roman Catholic. Or yes, Mary was assumed into heaven. She was, whatever the case may be. Yes, you shouldn't have sex before you get married. Really bad idea. A whole host of things. But I think that's what Father's talking about. Is we have to. He puts it this way, Joe. Tell me what you think. I want to talk to you about this. We have a few minutes before the. Well, we actually have about a minute before the break. But let me start the conversation with you. We must begin we have to remind our culture about history, civility, and the basic principles of the natural law. And I think he's spot on. I think we have to remind our culture of that because obviously we have no semblance of the natural law. You mentioned earlier about the article with the woman, fist pumping when finding out that Lindsey Graham had COVID. Okay, you see that, and we don't know anything about history. In other words, but if we want to build up or build back our civilization, we need to remind people of these things, and the only way to do that is to remind them of the fullness of the gospel. Everything we need to do, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, to preach to other people, and then we'll go to a break. Everything we need to do is contained in the gospel. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, God gave us all we need, to be honest with you. It's for us to listen to it and live it out. It's that simple, and he gives us the grace to do it through the sacraments. I mean, he everything that we're to do, and it sounds hard. Live, chase life, be open to life, all that stuff. Dude, that's not like stuff to sneeze at. Like a lot of times, people like I'll just speak about my own life. I have 4 kids under 7. Dude, that's hard. Like people like a lot of times in very Catholic circles, like, oh, that's great. Of course it's great. It's also hard. Like
Right.
people don't, or it costs a lot of money. Like I've heard like this is the part of the faith, but God gives you grace. You see, that's where you're trusting God as opposed yourself. I look at my own life and I could tell you this straight up and down. I'm over my head. If I don't have God, no, I know it, Joe. I'll say it
Joe,
straight out. I am way over my head. Like without God, I drown.
Let's go to a
Drown.
break. Let's go to a break. We'll pick this up on the other side. It's a great conversation to have. You're listening to the Crusade Channel. You're home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Professor. From sun up to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing. Stick around. We'll talk to you on the other side of the break. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. Way in the breach on the Crusade Channel. Always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. So, yeah, Joe, you said it right. In fact, the way you said it kind of made me reflect a little bit. I'm in way over my head. In other words, I thought about that in mass over the weekend. I think about it a lot. I'm in way over my head. The only way, the only way to really to break on through, as Jim Morrison said, to break on through to the other side is the grace. Without the grace, without the gospel, without accepting the gospel first, okay, in all its fullness, okay, and then the grace of the sacraments, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, the life of God that we share in through the sacraments. Who the hell am I? I'm toast, Joe. I'm toast. Way over my head. Married man at 43 years old. I thought I'd never get married. I asked for prayers for everybody. My wife and I are fostering a child right now that we hope is going to become our son in the future. All right. We'd ask for your prayers. Way over my head, Joe Resinello. But if anybody asks me, well, why do you do that? Jesus Christ. There can't be any other answers. My point, Joe. Tell me what you think. Somebody says, why did you do that? Whatever it might be. Jesus Christ. That has to be our answer. And his gospel. And the gospel. That's what Father's saying in this article.
But that's the virtue of the what's it called? The nativity in the joyful mystery. It's the poverty. You see, God works in that space. You see, when we rely, like my insurance policy is God. Like, I don't know how I'm going to pay for my kids to go to college. I don't know how. My house is small. My wife is pregnant with our 5th kid. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't.
Right.
But you trust God. You see, God works in that space. That's where we have to enter that space. We're reluctant as people. You see, God helps us through his laws, because here's another thing, and this is something getting back to Benedict the 16th. Um, we don't worship the doctrine. God gives us the doctrine to lead us to himself in love. You see, because if it's just doctrine, to be honest with you, you're not worshiping God. And we can't get caught up in that. We don't disregard doctrine, but
Uh-huh.
doctrine aids us to God because it puts us, like I'll use the example of, say, a married man who's open to life and has children, numerous children. You become vulnerable. You're not in control.
Right.
And in that space, God works in your life. You're living the faith. You're clinging to God, and God wants you in that space. You see, if you calculate everything on your own terms, you don't need God. You do, but you think you don't. And
Right.
God is almost like a word. And God, through the doctrine, is helping you. Again,
Right.
trusting the church, Mother Church. She says something, you do it
Right.
because it's for my benefit. A mother tells you something to help you, but that
Right.
doesn't mean it's comfortable. And that
No.
doesn't mean it's easy.
Listen, when Maximilian Kolbe gave his life, was it comfortable for him? Edith Stein, when she gave her life, okay? Saint was it Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, right? Saint Edith Stein.
Sure, sure.
Okay. Okay. It wasn't comfortable when Saint Stephen got his face smashed in by a rock, okay? Um, was not comfortable. But there was something in them where they knew, okay, they knew, and they had embraced, even though obviously we're talking about the, let's say Saint Stephen before the Gospels were written down, but you understand my point. But they
Sure, sure.
embraced the message and the teachings of the gospel. Okay, I will say this. I bring them up because again, getting back to Father Banneker here at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. I think Father's been listening to the front line, Joe, because he echoed what you always say, but it's true, and whatever is true bears repeating and bears repeating very, very, very often. Okay. He said the solution is the same now as it was then. When he's talking about, civilization on the brink of disaster at different times in history, he said saints, saints. Okay. Some names we know. He said Paul, Benedict, Catherine of Siena. Many we don't. All right. Future generations may not know our names. They will know the only thing. Did we fan the flames of that blessed conflagration sparked by Jesus Christ? It's for us to answer that with our lives. Fact is, Joe, I've heard this said before, and I love your comments on that. There's tens of thousands of more saints we don't know about. In other words, we don't know about the ones that the church never knew about, but they lived as saints. They had an effect in their families, in their communities, in their nations. Okay, we might never even know their names, but they lived saintly lives. They had what you call that radical trust in God, and even though they're not technically declared saints by the church, they're saints. They're in heaven. They didn't pass go and collect $200. They went straight to heaven. Okay,
Oh, there's tons
um,
of people like that.
and we need to have that trust. I think it was Bishop Barron mentioned Thomas Merton one time when I first was introduced to Bishop Barron about I don't know 10, 12 years ago after Father Carapi fell off the face of the earth. I started listening to Bishop Barron, and he was telling the story about Thomas Merton, and he was walking down the street with his friend, and he says, "What is it that you want?" They had just both become Catholic, and his friend asked Thomas Merton, again, I might be jumbling this a little bit, but I'm getting the idea right. Friend asked Thomas Merton, so now what do you want to do? He goes, I want to become a saint. I want to become a saint. Like I'm a Catholic now, but now I want to become a saint. And we actually all can be saints. We actually all can be saints. And we can have the effect that the Catherine of Siena's had, or the St. Dominic's had, or the St. Paul's had, or the St. Jude's had. We can have that same effect, but it has to, again, we talk about it all the time. Okay. And we're all imperfect, Joe. This is not a
Oh,
judgmental statement. We got to clean up our own house first. Lead to the best of our ability, virtuous lives, embrace the sacraments, and bear witness to that gospel, the fullness of the gospel that Father Banneker is talking about. Bear witness to that every single day of your life, no matter how difficult it is.
well, something I've been harping on a lot on my social media is action. You have to speak the truth, and we do. I mean, let's be honest. We have the show. I'm
Yeah.
also have a big mouth, vocal. You have to speak the truth. However, if your life does not echo your words, no one will listen to you. And I'll tell you this, and I am very aware of this, and all people can do this is to live a white martyrdom, to die to yourself. That's very hard. That is very, like the strongest people on the earth physically may never be able to do. That is the hardest thing to do on the earth, is to die to yourself. And in doing that, that is the greatest witness of Jesus Christ to another person. That is my goal, is to die to myself. And I do that through my vocation, which is my marriage. I
Right.
don't do it perfectly, but I'm striving to do that with my children, with my wife. If you do that and speak the truth, that's like you being in Giant Stadium on the frigging, like, the announcers, like people will hear you for forever.
Right.
That's the way to do it. And in order to do that, you have to fast and pray. In order to do that, you have to live a sacramental life, because it goes against the grain of human nature. I don't want to die to myself. That's why marriages fail. Selfishness. Marriage is not 50-50. It's 100%, 100%. It's giving of yourself.
Right.
God allows you to be married, so you die to yourself. But in terms of evangelization, the greatest evangelists were the saints. They spoke the truth, but they died to themselves. And because they did that, everyone listened.
You know,
That's what you have to do.
we might get criticized a little bit. I know that from the very beginning when we started doing our social media show, some of the people that used to tune in for purely, political commentary, okay, which we do enough of anyway, they get a little turned off when when we talk like this, Joe. I'll be honest with you. I've heard that feedback, not in a disrespectful way, but kind of like, nah, I kind of liked it better when you were focusing on Donald Trump or this, that, or the other thing. And to me, again, it's not judgmental, but it's an observation. Okay, you're mistaking the forest for the trees. You want solutions to our problem. Obviously, these people diagnose the problems the same way we do. They see the same problems we do, right? A lot of it's Marxism, just outright evil, abortion, a lot of it. Okay, but they don't want to hear the truthful solution to it, and that's a shame amongst conservatives. Okay, conservatives, Joe. In other words, whether they be evangelical conservatives, whether they be, let's say, lukewarm in their Catholicism, but politically conservative, okay? Um, this is the problem. Conservative Jews who are not necessarily Orthodox, kind of like they suffer from Americanism also, let's say, for argument's sake, is that they don't want to hear guys like us saying, if you really want the solution, perhaps you should look to the Catholic Church. If you're not going to convert to the Catholic Church, at the very least, you should see what the Catholic Church offers as solutions to our problems. But again, that goes back to what you said earlier. That creates an uncomfortability that people don't want to experience. You tell the average conservative Joe Resinello, you know what, know something? Contraception's a mortal sin. They'll laugh you out of the room.
Oh, there's no doubt. Joe, forget about anybody.
But real
Dude,
quick, well, I want you to comment on this. But real quick, I want you to comment on it. But if you listen to a guy who I like to listen to because I think he's smart, spot on. I don't agree with him on everything, but I think he's spot on. E. Michael Jones. If you don't think contraception is one of the is at the root of our problem and the contraceptive mentality, then you're basically a slave. He's accusing those conservatives who agree with contraception and by necessity then disagree with the Catholic Church on contraception. They disagree with Humanae Vitae. All right. He's basically criticizing them. Said, then you don't understand what the problem is. You don't understand what the problem. He's exactly right. They want to find political solutions to problems where we need moral solutions. And that is what Father is saying in this article. He's saying we need the fullness of the gospel. Okay. And Joe, I'm sorry. I know it sounds very critical, and you tell me if I'm wrong. Conservatives are just as guilty in many cases as liberals. Maybe not on abortion, but certainly on contraception. And let me tell you something, and more so and increasingly so on gay marriage. And,
well, again,
and
no one's going to invite you to the barbecue. In the when you start talking like that, and people will think you're a freak. I mean,
right,
even in Catholic circles, many Catholic circles. But I'll be truthful with you. I mean, if I believe, well, I know this actually. I live on grace, like you talked about being underwater. If you want to receive the fullness of grace, you can't put the umbrella up. And what do I mean by that? Grace is always coming down. We put the umbrella up by saying, I'm not going to go along with this. If you put the umbrella down, you get the fullness of what you know what I'm saying?
flows all over you, baby.
And that's
Flows
what
all
you
over
need.
you.
And you see, but that's hard. like you're getting something, but you're giving something up. What's that giving up? Respect. A lot of people won't respect you. You're going to be an oddball. You know, like you're going to be what did they say at the beginning of the Good Friday service about Christ? You know, he was shunned. I can't think of the exact. I believe it's from Isaiah. You know, he was not. He was his face was. He was rejected by men. He was
Right.
this. He was that. He was this. Well, that's going to be you. If you
Yeah.
follow Christ, that will be you. You
Right.
will be rejected by men. It's one of
Yeah.
the Beatitudes. You will be persecuted. And
Yeah.
we it's not like in our nature to go there. But if we want to follow God, that's what we must do. And to get that grace, we need to do that. You
Yeah.
see, like you know, like it's it's hard to be a Christian and a Catholic.
Joe,
Like
I want to piggyback on that. I want to just get personal for a minute, only because what you're saying just makes so much sense. Because I always want to emphasize, and you do too. All right, so it's not just me. We both always emphasize on the show. We want to emphasize to people we're not better than anybody else. We don't do things really better than anybody else. I think we listen more. I think we have more of a willingness to bend our knee. I think we have more of a willingness to go to confession and confess our sins. But I'm going to tell you along those lines, and it's funny you're saying it the way you did. I was thinking the other day because I struggle with all the temptations of my past. Okay. And I won't bore anybody with the details, but those things, when you do them, you got to remember, Father Carapi used to always say, you're forgiven of your sins, but there's always the wound from that sin that needs to be healed. That wound is always there. When you live the life of sin, those temptations are always there. I remember thinking in my mind the other day, in fact, I think it was yesterday, and I was in my car and I'm like, am I really that much different than I was? And it's an interesting thing because I had to think about it for a second. I think I said to myself, I'm really not. I'm truly not. Okay. And as far as sin is concerned, we're all walking a thin line, especially those of us who might have lived a sinful life, let's say an extremely sinful life in the past. But I came to the realization, maybe I'm not that much different than that guy, but I am that much different than that guy. And there's only one reason: the gospel, the sacraments, Jesus Christ. It's the only reason. Without that, I'm telling you, Joe, right now, I wouldn't be married. I wouldn't be fostering a young man who I want to be our son. I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't do anything that was for God. I would be completely worldly if it wasn't for Jesus Christ. So in that way, it's funny that you said it like that because it is difficult. On the one hand, it's easy to be a Christian if you're willing to bend your knee and to trust in God. Okay, these are not difficult things, and God is generous with His grace. You ask for it, He gives it to you. Okay, but it is difficult in that way because you always have the pull of the world, the flesh, and the devil always reminding you. So on the one hand, it's easy to say that you're a Christian. A little bit more difficult. You really have to struggle, as Saint Paul said. You have to work out your salvation in fear and trembling. But part of that is accepting the fullness of the gospel. You can't pick and choose. What did you say, Joe, 3 years ago when we first started this show? The cafeteria is closed. The cafeteria is closed. You got to accept it in its fullness.
and also to be honest with you, we're all going to fail. You just go to confession. I went to confession on Thursday. It was the last confession I went to was 3 weeks before that.
Right.
You fail. I'll be honest with you. My mother's living in my house. My wife is pregnant. I have 4 children. Believe me, I don't always measure up. I lose my patience. I lose my temper. Like you fall, and then you just say, "I'm sorry." You see, that's the key to it. I honestly believe that's what holds a lot of people back. It's not the fact that listen, following Jesus doesn't make you better than anybody. It makes your life better. You're not better, but your life will be better. And frankly, it will speak for itself. A tree bears, a good tree bears good fruit. But that doesn't mean you don't fall. It's people's willingness or unwillingness, rather, to say they're sorry. Whatever you
Right.
do, whatever your sin is, and encountering God in that confessional. You see, it's embarrassing to go to confession. It's embarrassing. Many people won't do it because of that. But when you humble yourself in that way, you're rewarded. You receive the Lord. It's tangible. You know He's real. You feel relief, and He gives you grace. You see, that's the key. You just have to say you're sorry, and your whole life will change. It doesn't matter what you did.
But
And
Joe,
then you
think about how
try your
difficult it
best.
is. Think about how difficult it is. We live in such a prideful world, and I'm using the word prideful, all right, deliberately. Okay, nobody wants to say they're sorry, Joe. That's the problem. Nobody wants to say they're sorry because sorry means you did something wrong. And we live in a world, I don't need to tell you, we live in a world where they're trying to convince 5-year-old kids that they don't have to be sorry for anything, where their parents are trying to discipline them. The teachers are telling them to do whatever they want. Adults can march in a pride parade that celebrates one of the worst sins that you could commit. In other words, we live in a prideful world. Nobody wants to say they're sorry. Nobody wants to say they're sorry. Okay. And it's a shame because if you don't bend your knee, if you think you don't have any sin, I think it was John that said, if you don't think you have any sin, then you're a liar and God's not in you. That means even a saint like St. Francis of Assisi. Do you know the story I heard? You can correct me if I'm wrong. You know more about St. Francis than I do. St. Francis of Assisi, up till 2 weeks before he died, thought he was going to hell. That's how unworthy he thought himself to let's say, go to heaven. He acknowledged himself to be a sinner. We live in a world that's the diametrical opposite of that. You could do anything you want. You could kill babies in the womb. You're completely virtuous. You're going straight to heaven. Ted Kennedy, remember, Joe, when he died, it was raining at the funeral, and the reporter said, "Look, it's tears from heaven." Guy's a baby killer. He supported baby killers, and he was a murderer. Okay. Bottom line is, nowadays, Joe, nobody wants to say they're sorry. That's a major problem. That's a major problem for society too, Joe. Not just that person. That's a major problem for society.
But it's just healthy. It's just healthy. Like I always think that sometimes there's so many baptized Catholics, at least where I live. We live in an area, it's in, New Jersey, northern New Jersey, a lot of immigrants, a lot of Spanish, a lot of Polish, a lot of Italians. They're all Catholic,
Yeah.
which you walk past the church. All you have to do, people have so many burdens on their mind. I think of myself. I had a very big burden. I got into a bad fight with my mother. I said mean things. It was a burden. I felt horrible. I went to confession. I felt better. You see how many burdens we carry on our back. All we could it's that simple. It costs nothing. You see, people refuse. Like it. I think of this sometimes with because I have friends my whole life. When the best decision I ever made in my life was to become a practicing Catholic. I will say that by far. And that's how I met my wife, which is the second best decision of my life, was to marry my wife. But I wouldn't have married my wife if I
If
didn't
you didn't
make that
become a
first
Catholic.
decision. And by making that decision, your life, again, I'm not better than anyone else, but my life is better than yours because I have God. It's not because I have like money or a better job. It's because I have God.
Right.
God is the answer. And people will see it. The thing that's sad is, again, you tell a tree by the fruit it bears. People just double down and they triple down and they wash, rinse, and return to the same behavior. If
Right.
something's not working, change. Go to God. He'll help you. I mean, it boggles my mind
Well,
how easy and free it is, and no one uses they don't utilize.
because it will require, and that's why planting seeds, as we always talk about at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online. Planting seeds is so important because at some point, Joe, remember, all we're doing is planting the seed that God is going to do something with. Take somebody who's living a sexually liberated lifestyle. Okay. I went through that in my life. You got out of yours very young. I didn't until later on. Okay. But I was one of the sexually liberated ones. And that's all I ever thought about was, like, well, I'm going to meet some woman in a bar with all that kind of nonsense. I know a lot of people that are still living that way to one degree or another. The seeds that I plant with that person, I know this. I know two things. Number one, That's a dead end because I went through it myself. So I know that person will come to the end of themselves at some point. And number two, I know that if I planted that seed properly, just in the course of a charitable, loving, truthful conversation, that seed will germinate. And then that person will turn to Christ. Because remember, it all leads to a dead end. Jeffrey Epstein could have pretended that he was living just this wonderful, great lifestyle worth $1 billion and bedding down every woman in sight. Okay. He could pretend that all he wants. He was obviously a miserable guy and he killed himself at the end. Okay. And lived a completely destructive lifestyle. And he's probably in hell. I'm not judging him. I don't know if he is, but he's probably in hell. That Jeffrey Epstein, before his fall from secular grace, okay, he would have been held up as a model of the way we should live. Make money, party, do this, do that, whatever the case is. Most people come to the end of themselves, is my point. And when they do, hopefully the seed we planted will be watered by God, and then they'll turn to God. Let's take a break, Joe, real quick, because we're coming up on that time, and we are on the radio on the Crusade Channel, your home for the Mike Church Show. Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Profession. From sun up to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing. Stick around. We'll talk to you on the other side of the break. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. We are way in the breach on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Please, we ask you all at the Crusade Channel, become a Founders Pass member. You'll have access not only to the content you have access to now, but to a lot more. So some new releases that you'll have access to coming out this week. You got the Mike Church Show. He's going to have Eric Sammons on. It's time for Catholic men of goodwill to prepare for separation from all big business. Joe Resinello, that's something we talk about all the time. Got to separate ourselves from these big corporations. So King Dude's going to be having that conversation with Eric Sammons, and you can't hear that conversation if you're not a Founders Pass member. Si Qua Virtus, Episode 6, Brett R. Smith and Daniel Savickas, the hidden dangers in the infrastructure bill. That's all available to you. All you got to do, go on crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. If you're not a member, become a Founders Pass member. If you are a member, upgrade to a Founders Pass member. We would encourage you to do so. So now, having said that, Joe, we were talking about heroes. We were talking about being merciful. Okay. I'm really, really disappointed in Simone Biles. Really disappointed. And I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah, I know Jonathan Van Maren on LifeSite brings us this story. She basically said she supports abortion of foster children. She was a foster child herself. These are her words. I believe she put them on Instagram. She said, I already know this is going to start a big argument and may even lose some followers of mine, but I'm very much pro-choice. Your body, your choice. Also, for everyone, going to say, just put it up for adoption. It's not that easy. And coming from someone who was in the foster care system, trust me, the foster care system is broken and it's tough, especially on the kids and young adults who age out, and adoption is expensive. I'm just saying. That's sad. I mean, listen, people are sincere, but they're sincerely wrong. We got to pray for her. It's a sad statement. I mean, clearly she came out of a tough situation. Now she's an Olympic athlete. I mean, gosh, doesn't get any better than that from a sports perspective, if you ask me. I mean, how she must have overcome so much. It's a sad, sad statement. But is it surprising? I mean, this is, Joe, I mean, think of take for, us, for instance. I mean, we were raised in families that loved us. Think about that. How many people that don't have loving families? We were educated. And one thing, my parents weren't perfect, just like I'm not perfect, but I always knew I was loved in my
Right.
house. Always, never for a minute did I ever think that I wasn't loved. How many people don't have that? And as a result of that, maybe, think about if I didn't have that, I might be worse than her
Right.
in saying
Right.
that statement. So it's easy to judge her. It's a sad statement. You know, got to pray for her, and hopefully she'll come around. That's
Well,
about,
the
because she
thing
is
is
a
this.
baptized Catholic.
Sure. No, no, no. Listen, I remember a couple of years ago when I first heard her name. Okay. So my wife, and everybody out there knows our wives are sisters. They're African American. They're Haitians. Okay. My wife is a big fan of Simone Biles, and my wife was the one who told me. She says she carries the rosary. She prays to Saint Sebastian. All right. Saint Sebastian died a martyr's death. Okay. You're praying to Saint Sebastian, and you can't see that abortion is the murder of an innocent human being in the womb. Now, you want to chalk it up to ignorance on the part of Simone Biles? But here's my point. When is somebody out there? When is the USCCB going to turn around? And yes, I am going to pick on them a little bit and tell all Catholics, if you don't believe in what the church says, okay, and you're coming to church, all right, you need to keep your mouth shut until you ask until you search for the truth of these things, which means inquire about the church teaching on gay marriage, on abortion, on contraception, on all of it. Okay, then shut your mouth. You're causing scandal. And Simone Biles, she just caused scandal. I was so much of a fan of this girl. And now I hear, and then the way she did, and then her response sounded like the head of Planned Parenthood. Really. Lila Rose came out, and Lila Rose basically said, you don't want to extend the same mercy to children in the womb that was extended to you because you're saying the foster care system is broke. So you don't want to give that other child the chance to overcome the foster care system that you were given. And you don't see the hypocrisy in that. Now I'm paraphrasing Lila Rose. Okay. But this girl needs to be woken up. See, this is the part of embracing the gospel in its fullness that we were talking about. Simone, you cannot be for abortion. You can't blame the foster care system and say, well, it's because of the foster care system I'm for abortion. You can't be for child murder. You pray the rosary. You pray to Saint Sebastian, who was a martyr. He was shot to death with arrows, Saint Sebastian. Okay. You pray to them, and then you're all in favor of killing babies in the womb. And your response is just like the CEO of Planned Parenthood, my body, my choice. That's not very Catholic, young lady. And she is a severe disappointment, Joe. Severe
Well, it
disappointment.
is. My guess, again, it comes down to bending your knee. I mean, a lot of times people have issues with the church, and we've talked about this. Underlying, it's one big issue that they're not willing to give up, and usually it's something that they're not willing to talk about. They know it. Um, people have to overcome those things in life,
Right.
or it's a bad habit they won't give up that they know is wrong, and as a result, they attack this issue, that issue. A lot of women, I'm not saying her, I don't follow her at all, to be honest with you. I know who she is, but a lot of women who are pro-choice, my guess is they've had abortions,
Right.
like, and they're not willing to say I did something wrong. Not all, I don't know their heart, but if I was going to bet money, especially the ones that are very, like, adamant and violently pro-choice, I would bet dollars to donuts that they were involved in abortion themselves, and they're not willing to say I did something
Right.
wrong. And and like any wound, it just gets
Right.
worse. It gets my guess is there's something there. I'm not saying that she had an abortion. I don't know. I would never say that because I don't know her. But it's about bending the
It
knee.
could be
When the
about
knee isn't fully.
It could be about that worldliness we talked about earlier. She's a very famous celebrity. She stands to make millions of dollars in endorsements and everything else. She's a very accomplished gymnast, all right? She's probably the best in the world. It could be that worldliness you were talking about earlier, or that we were talking about. In other words, she doesn't want to give up the endorsement contracts. She knows if she comes out as staunchly pro-life, or if she agrees with the church on the truth, which is that abortion is murder, okay, she may lose those endorsements. It could be just the money. I've said to you before, I got into an
It
argument
could
with my
be.
father years and years ago because I said to him, I said, well, why would a guy who's rich, why would he have to worry about cheating other people? He's already rich. And my father looked at me dead in the face. He goes, you're so naive. Because you think that, what do you think motivates most people? Money. Goes get it through your head, Joe. I must have been 17, 18 years old at the time. Goes get it through your head. What motivates most people is money. He goes, when you want to look to why people do things, most of the time, you don't have to look beyond money. And with Simone
He's
Biles'
right.
case, she's going to be she's going to be an American, as we talked about a few weeks ago on the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel. She's going to be the prototypical American Catholic. I'm a Roman Catholic, but I'm pro-choice. She's the Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi Catholic. She's a good American Catholic, which is not really Catholic at all.
No, it could be. I mean, who knows what's in her head? It's a sad statement because just because something, listen, I'm not, maybe there are problems in the foster care, but that doesn't mean it's bad. That doesn't mean those kids like shouldn't be alive. Because frankly, this is a sad reality. Think of Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was found in an orphanage.
Yeah,
He was an orphan.
yeah,
And look who he became.
yeah.
Babe Ruth, the best baseball player one could argue ever.
Right,
I have seen an orphanage in the third world. And what the first thing that came to my head was in America, every single one of these kids would be aborted. That was the first thought that came to my head when I saw an orphanage. When's the last time you heard of an orphanage in America?
right.
There are no
They did
orphanages in
away with them,
America
Joe. They did away with
because those children are aborted. And this is where, again, listen, that's where it comes down to sex. People, the church in her wisdom says you should not have sex outside of marriage. Why? One, because obviously it's the most beautiful thing a man and a woman can do together, and that's why it should be within marriage, but it should be open to life. But even if it's not open to life and you don't look at it as a beautiful thing, there's a very good chance if you are practicing casual sex regularly with somebody, the likelihood that a woman is going to get pregnant is high,
right,
whether you're contracepting or not.
right,
And it's that behavior that people can't put down or won't put
right.
down. They won't put it
And you know
down.
what? You know,
And that's about bending the knee. And that's a big reason why people don't go into the church. I will not serve.
right. And they'll be the first ones to say, no, 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 you're not going to put the devil's words in my mouth, but that's what you're saying. They say, well, no, I serve the gospel. I just do it in a Protestant church, which means you don't serve the gospel at all. Sorry. Protestantism does not represent the full. There's many true things that Protestants believe, but at the end of the day, they're in error. They're heretics, and they have a lot of errors. So you could say you're bending the knee at a Protestant church, but Protestantism is all about not bending the knee. Let's be clear. With all due respect to our Protestant brothers and sisters, it's about not bending the knee. Remember what E. Michael Jones told us in our interview with him from last year. He goes, Luther was the guy. See, a Catholic blames themselves and a choice of their own free will for their sins. That's why we say, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Okay, I'm sorry for my sins, Lord. I chose to sin against you. All right, we offer an act of contrition and we ask the Lord to forgive us and help us to not do it again. Luther turns around and blames God for his sins and then creates a whole theology around it. So therefore, you don't have to really do anything. So what sort of Christianity is that? It's a Christianity within which you do not have to bend your knee. Just believe in Jesus and the Bible, and you're fine. You can't even lose your salvation. You could say you believe in Jesus, profess you with your lips, and believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is Son and Lord. Okay, they say you lose your salvation. You can have 7 abortions after that, not say a word about it. You're going straight to heaven, according to Protestantism. This is the problem. Protestantism is the example in the world of not wanting to bend the knee, of those who want to call upon the Lord and say, Lord, Lord, where he's going to turn and say, well, do I know you? Now, hopefully he knows us, Joe. All right. But we're in the church that's the fullness of the truth. Okay. But will he say, do I know you? Okay. Because they don't think they have to do anything, let alone bend the knee. And obviously, Simone Biles, as a Catholic, needs to be straightened out. Simone, you have to bend your knee, particularly on this issue. Joe, there's a young man who's on his computer on the other side of this wall, okay, in my house. Simone Biles thinks he's better off dead because he's in the foster care system, but he's in my house right now. According to her logic, he would have been better off dead 12 years ago. And I'd say, so I take it a little bit personally. He may be my son. Okay. And even if he wasn't, I still don't want anything bad to happen to him. My point is that why doesn't she apply the same standard to others as she would herself? Would she have agreed that she should have been aborted? She's a world class gymnast. Of course, she wouldn't believe that, but then she'll say something stupid and evil like my body, my choice. No, no, that doesn't work. And Simone Biles should be shunned. She should be shunned. I thought she was a sincere Catholic hero. And then I heard this and I'm like, well, duped again. Ain't the first time, Joe. Ain't going to be the last time.
Well, it's sad. I mean, that's where hopefully she has a good priest in her life and they have a good conversation. I mean, people listen, you know, things take time. You know, I'll say this, if she's praying the rosary, if she continues to pray the rosary, Our Lady will show her the error of her ways. There's many people I sometimes, to be honest with you, there are people I follow on social media, and sometimes I'll read something and I'll say, wow, it shocks me, so to speak. But I know that they're devoted to the rosary. They pray. And in time, God, and listen, I'm the same way. Listen, I'm flawed to the ninth degree. Believe me. Same thing with me. God's not done with you. You know what I'm saying? Like never think that God's done with you. Because if he was, you'd be with him. You know, there's a lot you learn as life. I mean, I'm 51 years old. The more I learn about myself, the more I learn how flawed I am. It's like an onion. You know, the old man, like you said, could show up, you know, at any given time. You know, don't think for a minute that like you're some new redeemed creature, that you're incapable of sinning and you're incapable of being a bad man. Wrong.
Right.
Wrong.
Right.
Stay close to God. To be honest with you, if you start thinking that, the sooner you'll be that
I
way.
heard
Stay.
you heard of this new series out, The Chosen? You hear about that?
I have. I haven't watched it, but I've seen
I,
it.
I've
I've
watched
seen like the
I've watched
advertisements.
some of it, but interesting along the lines of what you say. Now, the guy who created it, Dallas Jenkins, I think his name is. Okay, so he's Protestant. I think he's evangelical. So he got a lot of pushback because he portrayed, and I didn't see this episode, but evidently he portrayed Mary Magdalene struggling with her past life. Okay, which is completely understandable. Okay, Mary Magdalene was a hooker. All right, and she lived a very dissolute lifestyle. So you can imagine, we as Catholics know that we all struggle. If you've lived, I mean, we struggle with sin to the day we die. We struggle against sin. So he portrayed that. Like, in other words, I didn't see it, but he portrayed the struggle that Mary Magdalene had. He got pushback from evangelicals, basically saying, no, you're wrong for saying it. He did a separate video on this, talking about that, exactly what you're saying, where they were saying, no, you can't portray Mary Magdalene like that. She knew the Lord. She saw the Lord. She was saved. She had no more temptation. And he was livid. He's like, St. Paul said to work out your salvation in fear and trembling. St. Paul said that he had the thorn in his side. St. Paul said, I do the things I'm not supposed to do, and I don't do the things I'm supposed to do. What are you talking about? Once saved, always saved type nonsense. In other words, and he got a lot of pushback. And this is, again, he's an evangelical, but he does not believe that. He believes, as St. Paul said, you have to work out your salvation in fear and trembling. Part of that is bending the knee. Part of that is
But
saying, I have sinned. Well, we do it in the act of contrition. In other words, oh my God, I am heartily sorry for having offended thee, and I detest all of my sins because of thy just punishments. And the prayer goes on. We do that in the act of contrition. We bend our knee and say, Lord, I'm sorry. I'm weak. I fell. I'm sorry. Please pick me up and give me the grace not to do it again. But it's what Tim Staples said that, Joe, and I'll hand it over to you. Tim Staples said that. I never heard it quite said this way. He said, once saved, always saved is one of the most dangerous things that a Christian can be taught. It's dangerous to your soul because it leads you to a false sense of security. It makes you think you don't have to ask for forgiveness. You don't have to bend your knee. That's the problem, I think. One of
it
the
also
problems.
comes to it comes down to who said, what authority do you have? I remember having a conversation with someone from my high school, and she actually said to me, well, I'm going to do it my way, meaning get to heaven. Like I'm going to go. But I said, I was like, what authority do you have? And actually in frustration in the conversation, she said none. And I'm like, exactly. It comes down to that. You see, following Christ, the underlying virtue of it all is humility. It's saying that my way doesn't work and your way does. You're God and I'm not. And it comes down to, listen, I'll say it again. Catholicism is painting by numbers. That's the beauty of it. Read it. It's all written down. It's not for you to change because you have no authority because you
You
die.
know what's even better?
No matter how smart you are, no matter how rich you
Mhm.
are, no matter what you think you are, you die. And that's it.
You know what's
And only God saves
You know
you
what the best part
or
about
doesn't.
what you said, or he doesn't. That's right. Okay. And if he doesn't, it's because he respected your free will that you rejected him, which is another thing people don't want to hear. One of the things that you always say about the Catholic faith is painting by numbers. You know, it's all written down in the catechism. But one thing I would just expand on that a little bit, and then we're going to go to a break, Joe Resinello, is that not only is it written down, it's not a series of rules. Okay. It's a statement of belief, but every single statement of belief is explained. You never come away from the catechism not understanding why the church teaches what it does on contraception, on abortion, on the Trinity, on the Assumption of Mary, whatever the case might be. Every single thing is explained because the church respects your intelligence enough to say, here's what we believe. Moreover, here's why we believe it. Okay. You're, in fact, encouraging me to pick up the catechism again. I haven't read it in a while, and I have never read it all the way through. I know you have. I need to read it all the way through. Let's take a quick break, Joe. So you're listening to the Crusade Channel, your home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Profession. From sun up to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing. Stick around. We got one more segment for you. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello, way in the breach on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. The last live radio station standing. Remember, become a Founders Pass member. There's a lot of content you're missing out on. So you need to become a member of the Crusade Channel, Founders Pass. Okay. And if you're already a member, make sure excuse me, you upgrade. So let's very quick, Joe. I want to move on. We only have one segment left, but I did want
You want to
to.
talk Pullman? You want to talk Pullman, Joy Pullman? You like that
Yeah,
story.
yeah.
You want to do that one?
Yes, but real quick, I do want to mention, you know, Uju, right? Obi and Uju, Ekiocha.
Sure,
All
sure,
right.
sure.
Talk about a
Yeah, yeah.
woman. Talk about a woman who overcame adversity. Okay. But Uju noted that and this spoke to me. That's why I wanted to mention it because I'm heartbroken. Joe, I'm broken in my heart over Simone Biles. I thought she was a good Catholic. I really did. And I looked at her as somebody who was going to be a good example to young girls. You got Britney Spears, Joe Resinello, that's converting to the Catholic Church. Heaven help us if she's pro-abortion. Okay, I don't know, but she said she converted to the Catholic Church. But Uju said it's always heartbreaking when people widely celebrated by Christians as admirable role models come out in support of abortion. I agree with her on that. It's terrible. Her priest, Simone Biles' priest, bishop, whatever, needs to have a conversation with her and explain to her the teaching on the value, the infinite value of every human life. So yes, let's move on. You're at the front line with Joe and Joe, Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. And as Joe mentioned, I really like this article. Joe, go ahead, kick it off because there's a few things in here. This guy Ben Domenech, I love him, man. I love Joy Pullman too. The Federalist is a great publication. But go ahead.
Joy Pullman, as Joe said in the Federalist, she put together 85 things that could help the United States shake wide awake. Now, obviously, we're not going to talk about 85 things. We're just going to highlight a couple of them. I think they're noteworthy. Things that all of us can do. I mean, we're all concerned about what we're seeing in the U.S. right now, and obviously, we can only do what we can do, And some of the things she noted, I think, are very practical.
Joe, can I make
First one?
Joe, can I make one point? Real quick?
Absolutely,
I
go.
think it's important.
Sure.
I think it's important to know because I think about this sometimes. When I think about things like this, lists of things we can be doing. let's get back to the gospel. Let's get back to the New Testament, right? Paul says not everybody could be a preacher, not everybody could be a teacher, not everybody could be this, not everybody could be that. Everybody's got to find their thing. He's talking about all Christians, and do that thing. Now, what could you and I do? Okay. Well, I think we're intelligent enough. We have PhDs in common sense. We've been saying that from the beginning. All right. Um, but the thing is, but we do what we could do. We said we got something to say. We're getting a message out there, so we're going to start a podcast, and we're going to get on. We're going to get on the King Dudes radio station down at the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online. And we made these things happen, and we're getting the truth out there. The Veritas Catholic Network up in Connecticut. We're getting the truth out there. We're doing what Paul said. We found the talent that we have. We're using that. We're using a skill, and we're getting the message out there. So I want to preface this article by saying, don't ever think that everything on this list you have to do. What we're doing is we're encouraging people that can get on a school board, go and get on a school board. Let's say a mom, Joe, okay, who wants to run for the school board. She's not working in industry. She's not the big breadwinner. She doesn't have to make a big salary, but she could run for the school board. And a group of other moms, let's say, run for the school board, run for local office, all these sorts of things. You don't, my point in this little diatribe, you don't have to take all this on yourself. You need to encourage people to do some of these things also. All right. And if everybody does their thing, if everybody fills their role, we can have a major impact. Go ahead, Joe.
First one I liked a lot because she says, start a neighborhood group. Present yourself under an umbrella that welcomes other responsible members of your community who are sick and tired of being sick and tired and who are willing to stand up. Now, why I like this one is you don't have to agree with everything your neighbor agrees with to do this, because there are some things out there that are common ground. Like, for instance, boys playing in girl sports. You could talk to a Democrat and they'll be like, I agree with you 100%.
You could talk to an atheist.
And they would be like, I agree with you 100% on that. And that's the beauty of this. You know, you're not going to sometimes agree like in your neighborhood. I mean, I can't speak for, you know, all the people on the Crusade Channel who are listening to my voice out there where you live, but I could just speak from my experience. My neighborhood is filled with all types of people. They believe all types of things. They're Republicans, they're Democrats. I have a cop that lives across the street. We agree with a lot of things politically, but he doesn't go to church. We're friends. Like, I don't hang out with them, but we talk. You know, politically, we're on the same page, but he doesn't go to church. So on those things, I'm sure we're not. But we could start a group. You see, don't try to just find like the person that sees everything the same way as you. You're not going to find that person, at least in a neighborhood. But in a neighborhood, you could find people where you have some common ground. Like I just used one thing, the schools. You could say, I don't want my daughter plays softball, and I don't want a boy on the softball team. I agree with you. Well, guess what? Let's join up. Let's fight to change it. We don't have to say, he might say, I'm a Jewish person. And you'll be like, I'm a Catholic person. Well, guess what? Who cares on that? We're not here to have that debate. What we're here to do is to fix this problem in the school. So work with them.
Right.
Don't just block them out because they don't.
It's a great recommendation. And a lot of people who are complaining about the power that's coming from the top, stop complaining about the power that's coming from the top. And to your point, Joe Arsenello, realize that you have power at the local level. What do you care if Biden's regime is in there destroying this country? In other words, if you start working at the local level, if every locality, look, the country's a red country, Joe, not communist red, okay, Republican or conservative red. Most of the counties are red. Most of the municipalities are red. Start working within your municipalities and take your power back. That's what you're saying. But you have to be able to, let's say, for argument's sake, defer to other people. I'm not going to become the mayor of my town. I'm going to tell you that right now. But I could be active in my town. I could support my mayor in my town. I could maybe get on the school board in my town. Okay. I could campaign for somebody who I want to send to Trenton or to Washington in my town. There's a lot of things I could do in my town. Okay. I could go apply to become a teacher. Okay. In my town. And try to make waves in the teachers union. Okay, we have friends that are in the teachers union. Most that tell us rank and file teachers are not in lockstep with their teachers unions, but they go along to get along, unfortunately, and they don't have the power. There's so many things we could do. That's a great first point. Here's one I like, and I just it's something that I said to myself, Joe. Ben Domenech must be listening to the front line with Joe and Joe. Stop paying your cable bill. Cut the cable. Okay. So cut off HBO and Showtime and the rest of it. Okay. And send the cable payment to something useful. The Crusade channel comes to mind. Okay. Become a Founders Pass member of the Crusade channel, something useful. Okay. Or your local church or a fund to help kids escape public schools. Now, Joe, last time I checked, the cable bill is probably about $90 a month. Okay. That's about $1,080 a year. You could do something really good with $1,000 a year.
Oh my gosh.
You could.
Totally. You could help
Why?
somebody.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, that's a very practical thing everyone could do. And frankly, it's a little bit of sacrifice. You know, it's almost like a fast, so to speak. You know what I mean? It's say you like it and you cut it out. That's like a fast. A fast doesn't have to be, keep this in mind. It doesn't have to be like flagellation. You beat yourself to death. It could be something very small, such as that. And you do that, for the greater glory of God, and give that money away to something or someone who really needs it.
Right.
Great thing. Great
Great
thing.
thing. And Joe, let me tell you something. And this comes somebody I've said it a million times. I used to be an actor. Okay, I made a short film 10 years ago. It's something that I always want to do. I know the entertainment industry. I know television. I know movies. Okay, I have been extremely, and I'm saying this objectively, not just because I'm Catholic. Okay, I'm extremely entertained by shows on HBO, but my life has not improved one bit because of any show on HBO. I don't need it in my life. I don't need that entertainment. I don't need to watch The Sopranos, all right, or Rome, or Deadwood, or any of the shows that I really, like I said, I really liked. I was really entertained by those shows. But my life's not better for those shows. My life's better when I turned off HBO and when I got rid of HBO. My life's better when I stopped watching Netflix. Okay. In other words, and Showtime. Okay. I remember back in the day, I binged watched Dexter. It's a movie about it's a television show about a serial killer. That didn't do anything for my life. Why did I get Showtime so I could watch Dexter? You know what I mean? And it's a very good point. Cut cable. It ain't doing a damn thing for your life. If anything, it's taking away.
I would agree. Here's one. Pay down your debt
Ooh, I'm
and
glad you
try
got to
to
that one.
become debt free. That is, I'll be honest, my mother used to say that before I was married. My parents lived in a modest house. They paid their house off in 10 years, and they never moved to another house. And she always used to say, your whole life will change once you pay off your mortgage. And my father was a barber and my mother was a secretary. I don't want to make it sound like they were rich people, because they weren't. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich. It can be done. You see, like it requires discipline. Like, to be honest with you, but it can be done in America. And I use my parents as an example because they weren't rich people and they did it. Because Joe has said this on the show many times. You buy a $300,000 house, you spend $600,000 for it if you pay the house off for the life, like the whole mortgage, 30 years. Why do you work to make other people rich? You
Right,
shouldn't. You
right.
shouldn't do it.
It's a theft of your labor.
Absolutely. And this is a way to improve your life. It
Yes.
really is. I'll be honest with you. If you have $10 in your pocket, eat something on that day for $10.
10
Get two
bucks. Yeah.
slices of pizza and a Coke. It's under $10.
Yeah.
You don't have to go and put something on your credit card. And
Right.
this is something I think that Americans, because of credit, it's so easily acquired, they can't grasp.
Right.
And
They can't.
it destroys them.
Well, because
It destroys them.
absolutely, the bill of goods is being said like it's It's the old line from Looney Tunes. Well, you too can have all these luxuries. All right. They try to convince you that you can have all these luxuries, okay, in the world, but all you have to do is just go out and get a few credit cards or take out a personal line of credit. One thing I would say is this: the banking system. Because you and I are not detached from reality. We understand reality. The banking system's not going to change. It's not. One thing you can do, let's say you're a husband and wife and you're going to go and buy a house and you're both working, which nowadays husbands and wives are both working. Buy a house that you could reasonably foresee that you could pay off in less than 10 years. That's one way of, again, you're going to have to go into debt and get the mortgage. However, you're not going to pay 100, 150, $200,000 because you have a plan to to do away with that debt within 10 years, okay, or less, okay, if you're both working. Dedicate that amount of money needed so that you're paying that much less in usurious compound interest. Because if you pay over 30 years, you're paying right through the nose. It's blatant theft of your labor. So you could alleviate that. But what does that do, though, Joe? If you're going to pay off your house in 10 years or less, okay, well, that means you're going to have to sacrifice. You might not be able to go out to dinner once a month. You might be able to go out once every 3 months. Okay. You might not be able to get a Cadillac. You might have to get a Nissan Altima. All right. Can't spend 500 a month. You might have to only spend 250 a month. Okay. Or something along those lines. But you're exactly right. Once we get, if you want to think, there's a few things that are enslaving us as Americans. Sexual liberation is one of them. We know that. People vote for Democrats because they're sexually liberated and they want abortion. The Democrats could tell them they're going to tax them at 70%. They'll still vote for Democrats because they want abortion available for themselves and their daughters. Yes, I'm blaming women for that. Okay. So we know that you're enslaved by the sexual liberation movement in the 1960s. You are also enslaved by usurious money lenders, usurious banks, and everything involves debt. Buy a cell phone. Well, no, cell phones are different. They don't really charge you interest. Go to Best Buy and buy a TV. They want to charge you interest. Go buy a car. They want to charge you interest. Why are you charging me interest on a car? You're already making a profit on the vehicle. Why should GMAC exist? In other words, which is a bank, Joe. GMAC is a bank, all right, where they charge interest and they make more money from you on top of the profit they're making on the car. These are the things we have to try to avoid. It is liberating. I will say this, Joe, as somebody who has struggled with debt in my life before I met my wife, and I remember the anxiety accompanying that. Okay. Since I met my wife, I've had very little or no debt. I'm only going to give you one word and then we'll move on. Liberation. Ah, that's what you feel when you have no debt or no debt to speak of. Okay. Where you're not paying seven, eight, 900, $1,000, $1,200 a month in minimum payments on credit cards. Okay. Liberation is what it is. We should all go out of our way to get out of debt as quickly as we can and don't get back into it.
Oh, I agree. And frankly, like I said, it can be done. It
Yeah,
can be done. And it also gives you liberty, like you talked about. To be honest with you, I mean, during the mortgage crisis, I did lose my job twice, to be truthful with you. And I had an apartment that was paid off. If I wasn't in that situation, I would have been in a lot of trouble. And I know people that lost their homes because they were in that situation. And frankly, if you work in corporate America, here's the sad reality. You could do everything right and still lose your job.
that's right.
Budget cuts, org changes, in nearshoring, moving from New York to Jacksonville, Florida, moving from Jacksonville, Florida to Ohio, and you're out of a job. So, I
Right.
mean, it's in your interest, if you ask me, especially if you have a family and you have kids, to live debt free.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one thing that we really need to get. E. Michael Jones hammers this all the time. There's one thing we got to get through our heads. No more debt. If you can't afford it, don't buy it. Don't buy it. And if you have to have it, you need to have a plan to get out of that debt real quick. Real quick. That's the bottom line. And we need to get started. Also, Joe, not for nothing, this is not mentioned in the list, but that also implies we need to start getting back to some savings. We need to start saving money again. In other words, as Americans, so that when we get through hard time, I mean, that's what people in the past used to do. They knew hard times were going to come sooner or later. They saved. They save money for a
Absolutely,
rainy.
and then
It's
you'll weather it.
for a rainy day.
Because here's the thing too, Joe, hard times, it's not if, it's when.
When?
You get laid, like I said, I work in corporate America. People get laid off. It's not necessarily like the movies, like you did something wrong. They get laid off. You got to
Right.
live. You got kids. You got to pay bills. What are you going to do?
Right.
You got it. That's why you got to live. It's like the old cartoon, the squirrel. He saved all his nuts in the winter. He was like sitting there, like eating popcorn. And
Right.
remember that it was like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. And
Right.
then they're knocking on the door, help me, help me, help me. I mean, life, you can't live, but you talk about Americanism, living above
Oof.
your means. I mean, that's a problem that haunts this country.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why when people think that corporations have too much power, that's one of the reasons why, because we spend too much money that we don't have, and we use credit cards to buy those things. We have to stop doing that. We again, we can't we can look at every problem we have in America, and at the end of the day, we can all find things that we can blame ourselves for. All of us, not just we're not pointing the finger at all of us do one or two things where we could get rid of those things too and make a real difference. So yeah, so getting out of debt, that's a big one. What else we got, Joe?
Well, to be honest with you, it talks about going to church. It talks about
Ooh.
going to church every week, going to church during the week, and picking up a handicapped person and taking them to church. Isn't
See,
it nice?
isn't this the embracing of the gospel message in its fullness? Go to church, not only on Sunday, go during the week and pick up an old person on the way.
How nice. How nice. But also, it talks about spending time with your kids, reading books to your kids, playing board games with your kids. These are good things, simple things. We all can do them. Um, One of them this one really jumped out at me. Start an online news blog. Well, guess what? That's what we do. You could
That's
do
right.
it too. You know what I'm saying? Everybody, like, and specifically what they were talking about in this article, like talking about local school boards, posting curriculums, doing screenshots to make people aware of what's
Aware.
going on.
Remember, it's not that we part of it is that we're to blame because a lot of people get complacent, Joe Rossinello, and they don't want to search out the truth of what's going on out there. It's too uncomfortable for them. And the other thing is that a lot of the times the information is not being shared with them. Most parents, Joe, you'd be surprised. Most parents who have kids in the public schools, they don't know about the idea that 5-year-old kids are going to be taught that 5-year-old boys can be taught that they can be girls and vice versa. Their parents don't know that. And when you tell somebody that, they go, no, no, well, go down to school, go ask them. Whereas most parents don't know that. Sharing information is one of the best things we could do. Joe, I wouldn't care if we did the show on the Crusade channel and reached 2,000 people, went on social media and reached maybe another couple thousand people. I don't care if it's not 2 million people. The bottom line is the more we say it, the more people will spread it, the more people will hear it, and the more people will come aware that there's problems. Share the information. Sooner or later, sooner or later, social media is going to get that ship is going to get righted. I think by people like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley. I think the Republicans will at some point grab their you know what and put it on the table and start to push back against big tech. I really believe that. I could be naive, but I really believe that. Okay. And when that happens and it's more of an open platform, or a lot of people go to Rumble, or a lot of people go to the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, wherever it might be, the free flow of information is going to get better. We need to feed into that free flow of information.
Oh,
That's
I
what I
agree
think.
100%. I agree.
Yep.
And frankly, it comes down to not being afraid to say it. A little bit of like courage out there. Also a little bit of, if people think I'm strange or I say this or that, so be it. I'm going to
Right.
say the truth because it's the truth and I think I can help people by it, and so be it. If you don't like me, okay, what can I do? You know what I mean? I can't make you like me. But at the same time, I'm going to speak the truth, and it's very important.
I'm gonna give you an example of that. And again, this is not a not something everybody could do, but it speaks along the lines of, let's say, being around people who are more accepting of you because they're people that, let's say, think like you. Dominique wrote it in here. Well, I actually lost it. But basically, it was go to Oh, move from a blue state or city to a red state or city. Now, that's not practical for a lot of people. So let me be clear about that. Okay. And I get it. But if you can, why not? Why not? Now I know within blue states, don't worry, there are plenty of enclaves where you could find good people that think like you and they appreciate what you do. A lot of Joe and I know a lot of people like that, okay, that support us locally. But there's even more so sometimes. And another thing too, if you can, take power away. If you move to a red state, remember something, Joe Rossinello recently, and then we're going to bring it to the end of the show. Didn't California lose a couple of congressional seats? Didn't New York lose a congressional seat because of the exodus out of those states? You could take power away from these blue states. In other words, if you make a decision, say, well, look, I can get out of here, and I'm gonna. And as far as New Jersey is concerned, and Phil Murphy, screw you, creepo. That's what I say.
Listen, it like you said, that's the beauty of living in America. One of the good things, you can move. You don't have to be, and frankly, different governments, different state governments, they operate differently.
They do.
I
Well,
mean,
that's one of the reasons why. That's one of the reasons why I heard that Biden is going to try to put the kibosh on movement of American people in between states. I don't know how on earth he's going to get away with that, or he thinks he's going to get away with that. But that's one of the reasons why, because a lot of people look. It's been happening since before COVID. People are leaving New York. They're leaving New Jersey. They're leaving. They're going to Florida, Texas, Arizona. They're leaving California and they're draining the power, or at least starting to drain the power out of these blue states. Democrats can't have that. So what does Potato Head Biden do? He turns around and says wants to restrict movement in between states. Again, I don't know how he's going to get away with it, but it does show you that that's something that can be very, very effective. I do think Joe Rossinello, though, we do have to leave it there, unfortunately. But this has been a phenomenal conversation, and we want to thank you all for joining Joe Rossinello and myself and listening to us on the Crusade Channel, your home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Profession. From sun up to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last lie.